Part of InfoCaster's power is the ease with which we can play out our media, at predetermined times and on the days required. Understanding how InfoCaster's sequencer works is key to unlocking the scheduling power of this device. Let's create a new InfoCast and call it Sequencer Demo. Once we've created a new InfoCast with a white background as its base layer, we will draw a still object and load new stills from the tutorial file. The graphic importer is already selected, so click Add. Navigate to the tutorial folder and open Restaurant JPEGs, then Meal Graphics. Select the Meal Basic folder, select all and click Open. Scale them to fill the created region, but before we hit Save, deselect the Auto Add to Sequence checkbox. All the images have been loaded into the item library. The icons are on blue backgrounds. Click and drag the breakfast plate JPEG into the sequence window. Note that the breakfast JPEG icon is now on a green background in the library. This indicates the item has been added to the sequence. Select and drag the lunch plate and dinner plate JPEGs into the sequence. Their icon backgrounds in the library are now also green. Click the chevron button on the sequencer menu bar to fully open the sequencer window. This button toggles the window open and closed. Click on Sequence 1. We can now adjust the items in the sequence settings window. Note that the sequence begins at midnight. The default duration of each of the images in the sequence is 10 seconds. We'll show you how to change individual item times in a moment. As we saw in the playout of the simple InfoCast we just built, the default transition was Snap, a cut between each item. Click the drop-down transition menu. There are many other transitions to choose from. For this example, we'll choose Dissolve, and we'll leave the duration set as 1 second. It's important to note that transitions are dependent on the video card in the InfoCaster player. Some cards may only show a transition list that ends at Dissolve. Now, let's get into the power of the sequencer. In the Item Settings menu, with the breakfast plate image selected, the first thing we do is deselect Sunday, since the restaurant isn't open on Sunday for breakfasts. Please note that we can also select and deselect the available days on the item itself within the sequence window. The next thing we do is set the time that the breakfast image will play. Breakfast is served from 6 a.m. until 11:30 a.m. So we will set the times appropriately. We can do this in the larger item settings window or on the item itself. We'll look at the Don't Play Before and Don't Play After controls in a few moments. We will set the duration for the breakfast menu to 10 seconds. Select Lunch Plate. Lunch is available 7 days a week, so we will leave all the days selected. Lunch is served between 11:30 a.m. and 3:30 p.m. We will also change the transition for the lunch menu to Ripple Fade. Dinner is available from 3:30 until 9:30, 7 days a week, and we will use a Dissolve as the transition for dinner. Click back on the Sequence 1 bar and notice a number of things. This sequence begins every day at midnight and loops for the entire day, starting again at midnight. However, right now we only have 3 images that play from 6 a.m. until 9:30 p.m. Let's add a few more images from the tutorial folder to our item library. Open the additional meal folder. Select all. Click Open, scale them to fit, and then save them to the item library. From the item library window, select and drag the restaurant logo into the sequence. The restaurant logo is going to play 24/7, so we won't be setting play item between. It will be shown for 10 seconds at a time, and we'll use Push Blur 1 as a transition. 2 seconds long with 50% softness. Then we will bring the other plate images into the sequence, not including the Halloween image. Breakfast Plate 2 will match the settings for Breakfast Plate 1, playing between 6 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. and not on Sunday. Like the logo, it will be on screen for 10 seconds and it will use a 1-second dissolve as its transition. We will do the same thing for Lunch Plate 2 and Dinner Plate 2, having them match the settings of their respective images in terms of when they play, while being on screen for 10 seconds at a time. The Halloween image is a little different. We only want it to play on October 31st and only while the restaurant is open. Halloween falls on a Sunday this year. We could choose to select Sunday only, but this really isn't necessary, as we will see in a moment. Set the item to play during restaurant hours. Then set the item to not play before October 31st. And not to play after October 31st. It will only play on Halloween. If we had decided to also have it only play on one day of the week, but accidentally selected Saturday, the Halloween image would not play at all. The sequencer logic is to first look at the Don't Play settings, where it sees that the item is only to play on the 31st. The sequencer then looks to the next parameter and sees that the item is only to play on Saturday. The 31st is on Sunday, so this setup means that the item does not play at all. The Don't Play Before and Don't Play After settings are a great way to create holiday, seasonal, or sale events. But what if we want something to play out exactly at noon every day? This sequence begins at midnight every day. It plays the available items in the sequence, based on their settings. Setting the breakfast images to play between 6:30 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. means simply that based on the looping sequence, the breakfast images will be shown at some point after 6:30 a.m. and not at all after 11:30 a.m. If we want the breakfast images to be shown exactly at 6:30 a.m., then we need to create a sequence that begins at that time. After creating a new infocast and adding a still item to the page layout, we bring all the images in from both folders in the tutorial restaurant directory. Sequence 1 is set to play from midnight and loop until midnight, unless we add another sequence. Select all the images and drag them into Sequence 1. Select the Sequence 1 bar and adjust the sequence settings, leaving the sequence to begin at midnight. Change the default duration to 6 seconds, the default transition to ripple fade with the 1 second duration and 20% softness. Since we want the breakfast sequence to begin exactly at 6:30 a.m., deselect End Item before changing sequences. If you don't deselect End Item before changing sequences, then the sequence will continue until the last item in your sequence plays, which means you can't guarantee when the next sequence will actually begin. By deselecting End Item before changing sequences, you guarantee that the next sequence in the list will begin exactly at the time you choose. Now we'll add the breakfast sequence, which begins exactly at 6:30 a.m. Hide the expanded Sequence 1. Click below it and add a new sequence, and call it Breakfast. Set it to begin at 6:30 a.m. Add the restaurant logo and the breakfast images to the sequence. Deselect Sunday on the breakfast images. Select the breakfast sequence bar and change the default duration to 6 seconds. And make the default transition dissolve, leaving the duration at 1 second. Then drag the Hot and Not restaurant logo to the top of the sequence, so it's what comes on screen exactly at 6:30 a.m. Click on the breakfast sequence bar again and notice we did not deselect End Item before changing sequences. Since we will want the lunch sequence to begin exactly at 11:30 a.m., deselect this item. Close the Items view in the breakfast sequence, click below it, and add a new sequence. Call it Lunch with a start time of 11:30 a.m. We will then drag the appropriate items into the lunch menu and set it up as we did the breakfast menu, including adding the Halloween image and setting its Don't Play Before and After dates. We will do the same for the dinner sequence, which starts at 3:30 p.m., and the closed sequence, which begins at 10 p.m. But what if we want the layout of our infocast to change at specific points of the day? Let's take a look at how we do that. Here we've created a new infocast and called it Sequencer Demo 2. The first Sequencer Demo 2 page layout has images from our previous sequence. In the page library, we will add a second page layout, here shown as Page Layout 1. Add a few items to the still item in that layout. Click the Pages icon in the menu bar. Click the chevron on the right side below the sequencer bar. Both page layouts are in the sequence. We can now modify the page layouts to play when we want them to only play between certain dates, to play for a set length of time, and to transition between them. And as we've already shown, items in each page layout have their own powerful sequencing capabilities, providing a high level of sequencing sophistication. Infocaster also provides you with triggers, another powerful scheduling tool for displaying information when you want or need it displayed, with many options for what triggers that display. I've set up this trigger demo with 2 items in the video region, Times Square and Times Square 2, and 2 images in the still region. But now I want a particular image to appear in the still region whenever the Times Square 2 video plays. I do this by adding a new sequence to the still. But I immediately deselect the sequence. The image that I place in it will be triggered by the Times Square 2 video, rather than being displayed through the sequencer. Once the image has been added to sequence 2, I click on Rules in the menu bar and then Add New Rule. Under the Choose Trigger drop-down, I have a number of options. I can set the still to trigger when an item starts, an item stops, a sequence starts, or when a data source changes. Perhaps we've set it up that when the temperature has hit a predetermined high, the trigger plays an event advertising cold drinks and ice cream. We can also set a trigger for an exact time. In this case, I'll select Item Starts, that item on the trigger demo page, within the video region on sequence 1, and when the item Times Square 2 plays. Then I need to select what happens when the event is triggered. In Action, I select Item Playing, though I could have a new sequence triggered or send a GPI to a player. Trigger Demo is the selected page, the region is the still, the sequence is sequence 2, and lunch hours 001 is the item. Saving this item, we see it appear in the conditional playback window. Setting up triggers provides you even more power in how and when you display information in Infocaster. Before we move on to the next section of the training, Infocaster Manager, we'd like to remind you of a few things. The first is that Infocaster dynamically saves your Infocast creation while you are creating. So if you've created the coolest Infocast in the world and want to use it as a template for a new Infocast, immediately do a save as with a new name, maintaining your original Infocast as created. And not to belabor the point, but please remember that you need copyright approval for any images, graphics, video, or audio you use in an Infocast. In our next chapter, we will look at Infocaster Manager,